There's a lot of information in the self chapter in the text, so we're breaking the information into 2 modules to make it a little easier to handle. The first module is about the theory of self, how self-concept develops and how self-esteem develops. We'll start with a few definitions. So when I say self-concept, I'm talking about the relatively stable set of perceptions that you hold of yourself. So who do you think you are? What do you think you're like? If you were to describe yourself to another person. Self-esteem is the part of that that has a valuation in it. So what do you think you're worth? So this is what I'm like, and I think it's a good or a bad thing, or these are my strengths, these are things that are my weaknesses. As soon as you have a valuation in it, it's related and becomes part of your self-esteem. How do you measure up? Self-control is something that, a skill that we use to change some part of ourselves in order to meet a personal goal or in order to meet a social expectation. So for example, you might think, well, I think of myself as a very outgoing, talkative person. So that's part of your self-concept. Self-esteem might be sometimes I don't feel good about it because I think I take over in groups and I'm too outgoing. So that's the measure of self-worth. So self-control would be what you exercise to say, I'm going to try to tame my inclination to be really talkative and to maybe take over class discussion. So the diagram at the bottom of the slide shows you a little bit how that could work. So with a desirable behavior, usually you would think, I did that well, and it'll give you a boost to your self-esteem, make you think, yeah, I can do that, and then you're likely to repeat the desirable behavior. So that's a good thing. However, if the behavior was undesirable, so you didn't do something well, you would think, well, I failed again, and that could impact your sense of self-esteem. And when you're feeling not so good about yourself, you have thoughts like, well, I can't do that. I couldn't do it last time. I won't be able to do it this time. And then you repeat the undesirable behavior. So self-control should be something that you can use when you have a negative cycle to say, well, I may have failed, but I'm going to change something so that I handle it differently next time. Your text gives some information about how self-concept develops, and this is really important theory because you're going to look at how your own self-concept developed, but because we work so closely with children at a time when they're really taking in a lot of influences, knowing about self-concept helps us to interact with them in ways that are positive. So a key term in the text is reflected appraisal. What reflected appraisal means is that we appraise ourselves. We give value to or see ourselves as we are reflected in the eyes of others. So a way of looking at that would be if a child looks to a significant other, so that's a really important person in their life, someone whose evaluations of them are influential or have a lot of meaning, so perhaps their mother. A child looks at their mother and what they're seeing is themselves in their mother's eyes. My mom thinks I'm a really good girl, might be it, right? So that's what they see reflected back from their mother, and they accept that appraisal. Of course, that's not always a positive thing. Sometimes they could be looking at a significant other, maybe a teacher, and they think, my teacher doesn't think I'm doing well enough. My teacher thinks I talk too much. My teacher thinks I'm not a good student. So that's another significant other. But this time, those influential messages are not positive ones. So reflected self-appraisal is how we see ourselves in terms of people we have relationships with that are influential to us. Social comparison is a similar kind of thing, but this time, instead of getting that appraisal back from an influential person, it's a reference group. So that means, how do I think I compare to maybe others my age, or people that live in my country, or others of my gender, or so you look at a bigger group and you think, well, how do I fit within the group? So when, as children are developing, and particularly as they're going through middle childhood and into the teens, parents and caregivers will observe that, wow, all of a sudden they may have been influenced a lot by significant others like their parents or the school, the teachers, but they become more influenced by reference groups like a broad group of peers, right? So other teens think this, other kids are doing that. Music and television and media, they all send out message about reference groups, and social comparison is the way that we take that information in and use it to shape our self-concept and self-esteem. So as you go through the module, spend some time thinking about your own developing sense of self and the key influences that are behind it. So consider things like the important people in your past, so the significant others that were important to you at earlier ages, and also the people in your present, people that continue to send out important messages. Then think about reference groups. What groups did you model yourself after? What was important to you? Who was important to you in terms of a broader social group? And then think about societal messages about who and what you should be. Then your reading goes on to look at some of the influences on self-concept, and also some of the ways self-esteem forms. So the first section you'll get into is self-development in context, and that means really related to what's around us. And a couple of the key things to pick up on are the effect of things like language and how it shapes identity. So this is really key, I guess, when you think about how our culture uses language for girls as opposed to language for boys. So your text will get into that kind of detail. Also, the text talks about cultural values and norms, so how different cultures have different expectations and how they exert different influences on development of self-concept. Then the text goes into specific characteristics of self-concept. One of them being that your self-concept is subjective, and subjective just means not definitely measurable or factual. When something is subjective, it's open to opinion, or people can view it differently. So your self-concept can be based on obsolete information, for example. Maybe something was true of you in the past, but really no longer is, but you hold on to the old information. You might be receiving distorted feedback. So for children, that can happen if they have a parent, for example, that's a real perfectionist. Then the child can get a lot of messages that they're not measuring up, when in other people's eyes they're doing really well. A negative mood can influence how we look at self-concept. So it can make you view everything in a darker light, and that can be a mood because of things happening in your life. It could be related to depression. It could be related to temperament. So all of those things can affect self-concept. Also, how strong are the messages you're getting about myth of perfection? So are the people in your life sending messages that you should measure up to a really high standard? Are the reference groups that you look to having a high standard. And sometimes children's stories really also add to that, because a child may be hearing about a lot of children that are quite exceptional and capable and clever and witty, and they conquer all, right? So those are good. There's some good things about those stories, but sometimes it may make them feel like, wow, I'm not any of those things. And then, of course, social expectations. So an example of that is how society can expect us to be quite modest. We're expected to underplay our achievements. It's too bold or too arrogant to say, yeah, I'm really good at this. So your self-concept might be really affected by pressure to be modest. Another characteristic, though, is that a healthy self-concept is flexible. So it should be able to accept change. That change might be from one situation to another. So even if a person isn't seeing themselves in a certain way in their work environment, they may see themselves in a different way in their home environment. And hopefully, if they're feeling better about themselves in a home environment, that will help them to support them in having positive changes in how they see themselves at work. Self-esteem also changes as people age. It's part of the maturing process to be able to maybe see yourself more realistically, or realize, as other people around you aren't perfect, that you don't expect yourself to be perfect either. So typically, hopefully, that's a more positive change, that you feel better about yourself as life goes on. Sometimes it's not true. Sometimes people are faced with challenges in their life that will erode their feelings of confidence or capability, and that, of course, has an impact. Self-concept tends to change less radically after about age 30. So by then, you've had enough time to look at yourself, how you are in the world, how others view you, and you've had enough time to reflect on it to put yourself into pretty stable state of mind. However, the self-concept does continue to be flexible. It also resists change, and once you have a certain way of looking at yourself, although it can change, it does kind of resist that. So you see yourself a certain way, and then sometimes you're surprised. And certainly we'll hear that from students who come to the college who maybe have had some years off from school, and they come in thinking, yeah, I'm not a good student. And then when they do well, they're quite surprised. They have a hard time of rethinking of themselves as being someone who is quite competent, right? But it may have been that in high school or in school they were really sociable and didn't take school very seriously, and kind of fooled around a lot, got really poor grades just because they weren't really focused. They may be capable of really solid work once they've decided, yeah, I really want to do this, right? So that's an example of how sometimes people will hold on to an old self-concept. We tend to look for information that supports how we already see ourselves. So that's called cognitive conservatism. So if I think I'm not so good at something, I'll look for times when I haven't done well, and those will be the times that I remember more than the times that I did a good job. So 4 requirements for feedback that will help you to change. So if someone is giving you information, is this information going to change you? You're probably looking at whether you think they're a competent person. So is this someone I have a good opinion of? Is it someone that is personal to me? So I feel a closeness to them, their opinion matters. Are they giving me some reasonable feedback? Does it seem like, yeah, I guess that does make sense, or that does seem fair? And then if it becomes consistent and numerous, so you see other examples or other people sending you the same messages, that will help you to have a positive change in your self-concept. And the last part that we'll talk about in that presentation is the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy and communication. So that is covered in your text. Read it carefully and really think about this one, not only in terms of how you've been affected in your past life, but how might the things that you're saying and doing set up self-fulfilling prophecies for other people. So for example, in the text you'll learn that there are different types of self-fulfilling prophecies. Sometimes those come from within, they're self-imposed, how we view ourselves, and sometimes they're externally imposed. So someone gives us a sense of how they think we're going to perform, and we perform to it. Self-fulfilling prophecies can be a really positive thing in your life. They can help you to achieve, they can help you to move forward, meet challenges, but they can also be really harmful, and not just in terms of your life and your sense of self-esteem, but also your relationships with others. How you interact with others can really be affected by these self-fulfilling prophecies. So as you read the text, pay close attention to that theory and be sure that you understand it. So go on now with your readings and the work for the unit, and hopefully you'll be setting a good base set of knowledge for the next module, where you actually start looking at, okay, how does this all apply to me as an individual?